After the arrest of a Palestinian green card holder, Mahmoud Khalil, in the United States of America on charges of being a Hamas sympathizer, it's an Indian PhD candidate who has hit the headlines. Ranjani Srinivasan has taken the option to self deport, a fancy word for leaving the United States of America before she would have been arrested after she too was accused of being, quote unquote, a terrorist sympathizer. From green cards in the United States of America to a debate around OCI cards in India, countries are drawing new red lines. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo story. On the program today, who is the PhD candidate from India who is heading outside of the United States of America, basically leaving the shores of America? You can see that video on the screen after having been accused of being a terror sympathizer by the Trump administration. She is the second student from Columbia University to hit the headlines. The arrest of Mahmoud Khalil, a Palestinian green card holder, has hit global headlines this after it has polarized the United States of America. Columbia University has actually announced a series of suspensions and even expulsions in relation to protests that took place last year before Trump became president with regard to the ongoing conflict between Israel and the Hamas. Ms. Srinivasan is now accused by the Trump administration of being a terrorist sympathizer. She has chosen the option of self deportation. The video was released by US Homeland Security. You can see her there leaving the shores of the United States of America. And this is a fate that now may hit many thousands and thousands of other students, including those from India who choose to build a life in higher education in the United States of America. Even as this story has hit the headlines, has come another story, this time in India, of a United States journalist who is suing the Modi government, according to the Guardian newspaper. This after his OCI card was cancelled on charges of spreading malicious propaganda against India. From green cards in the US to OCI cards in India, countries are drawing new red lines. Let's introduce our guests on the program today as we look at this Indian PhD candidate who has hit headlines in America for all the wrong reasons. Tavleen Singh, author, columnist, and journalist, is with us. Welcome to the program, Tavleen. Prasad Duvurri, a green card holder himself from the United States of America, is with us. Welcome, Prasad. Abhijeet Iyer, Mitra, political analyst, is with us. Welcome, Abhijeet. Sanjay Hegde, senior advocate, is with us. Good to have you with us, Sanjay. And veteran diplomat, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, is back with us. Always a pleasure, sir. Ambassador Dayal, I'll start with you. The Trump administration is showing that it means what it said in the campaign, in its rhetoric. It has classified those who took part in protests against Israel's action in Gaza in support of Palestine as terror sympathizers, as Hamas sympathizers, and now an Indian has followed Mahmoud Khalil in hitting the headlines. What do you make of the fact that this young woman has chosen to, quote unquote, self-deport? Her visa has been revoked. She's been called a terror sympathizer officially by the US Homeland Security. Is this a matter for India to be involved in, or is this a matter for the government to strictly stay hands-off on?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. Unfortunately, protest isn't as free in the US as some people seem to think. People seem to think that you can protest without repercussions. But protests are very tricky ground. As anyone who has ever studied their legality will tell you, if you are on a student visa in the US, it is better to stay out of trouble. Now, I was Consul General in New York for 4.5 years. And I often interacted with Indian students studying in the universities in the 12 US states which were under my consular jurisdiction. Now, I always advised them to avoid getting sucked into American political protests because of their visa status. I told them that they were scholars, not activists. I also told them that if they get onto the wrong side of the law, they must lose their student visa status and be deported. There is no appeal, and the deportation is permanent. They would not be allowed to re-enter the country at a later date. As a matter of fact, my advice is that if you're a foreign student in any country, it's wise to keep a low profile unless you want to cause trouble. Now, in this particular case, Ranjani Srinivasan, an Indian citizen, studying at the Columbia University in the United States, self-deported to Canada after her visa was revoked. Now, self-deportation is an approach used in the United States that allows a person to voluntarily depart from the country rather than face removal proceedings in court. Now, self-deportation gives the individual a chance to return to the United States legally in future, which is not the case if the Department of US Homeland Security deports the person. Now, the Department of State had revoked her visa on March 5 for allegedly advocating violence and terrorism and for being involved in activities supporting Hamas. Now, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security had said in a statement that it is a privilege to be granted a visa to live and study in the United States of America. But when you advocate violence and terrorism, it's a privilege that should be revoked and you should not be in the country. Now, I would also like to state that the Trump administration has vowed a severe crackdown on what it has labeled as pro-Hamas protesters. The signals that are coming indicate that the Trump administration has no intention of easing its crackdown on the pro-Palestinian student activists and the university politics that it says allowed anti-Semitism to flourish in the campus. Now, I may just add one last thing. Earlier this week, the Department of Education warned that it was investigating 60 universities and colleges for allegedly tolerating a hostile environment for Jews. So we may see more trouble taking place for foreign students.
Can I ask you, Ambassador, before I open this up?
Yes.
Strictly speaking, the US has imposed its own rules and regulations here. There's nothing that the government of India should be doing or could be doing. This is an Indian citizen.
Unfortunately, the government of India cannot do anything because those students are bound by US laws. They are on US territory and it is the US legal system that applies to them. And she has done the right thing by taking the recourse to self-deportation because she can fight the matter in US courts. And if the decision of the US government to take away her visa status can be overturned, then she will have the right to come back to the United States. But the matter has to be sorted out through the US legal system.
Right. So let me bring Tavleen into this. Tavleen, I think Ambassador Dayal is saying that this has nothing to do with India. This is a country invoking its own rules and regulations. The land of the free may not be quite the land of the free. That's, I think, the supreme irony. But Trump has made no bones about the fact that he's going to do things differently. What is your first thought as you see the images of this young woman packing her bags and leaving, ironically, for Canada?
Okay, I want to say before I say anything else that I am a passionately liberal Democrat. If I have any political view in the world, it is liberal democracy. And you know what is happening now is you're seeing America becoming a slightly illiberal democracy, a little bit like, other illiberal democracies. But having said that, I want to say that I was appalled by the protests on American campuses because these were people who did not understand what Hamas stood for. So if on Indian campuses you suddenly tomorrow find everyone supporting, say, Hafiz Saeed or who's that, the Maulana, whatever his name is, then, the Indian government has absolutely the right, in my view, because those are terrorists. Hamas, in my view, is a terrorist organization. What they did on October 7th was a terrorist act. It wasn't war. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm fully with people protesting, etc. But if you support a terrorist organization, and if you become completely violent in your aggression against the Jews, which we saw a lot of in Colombia particularly, then, you should be prepared for the consequences.
So in other words, what you're saying is you passionately identify with being a liberal Democrat, but you don't think supporting the Hamas counts as the right to free speech.
Yeah, no, I think if you're supporting a violent terrorist organization, then you are actually backing terrorism. And in my view, that is unacceptable. That isn't
So,
free speech.
so
That
I
is,
do. Yeah, I do want to flag the fact, though, that India, as far as I know, has not technically classified the Hamas. Please, anybody correct me if I'm wrong, as a terror organization. India hasn't. Abhijeet, am I correct in that? And let me bring you in for responses, Abhijeet, Iyer, Mitra, to what's happened. It's very interesting. Tavleen says she doesn't agree with a lot of what goes on, by conservatives, but she doesn't think coming out and supporting Hamas is free speech. Ambassador Dayal says, speaking as a diplomat, none of our business. The Americans invoked their laws. Ranjani Srinivasan should have known better as a foreign student than to get embroiled in protests in another country that is not her own. Points all well taken. Students might argue, young people, that these protests were in the context not in isolation. It was not about do you support Hamas or not. It was also a protest against Israel's action in Gaza, and they came out in that context. And therefore, to call them terror sympathizers is reductionist. What would you say to what's happening with Mahmoud Khalil, Ranjani Srinivasan, and so on?
So the first thing we need to remember that visa is a privilege; it is not a right. It is given to foreigners, and foreigners in your country absolutely do not have the same rights that citizens do. Now, unlike India, which cancels visas willy-nilly, uh, uh, for whatever reason. There was this Goa politician who broke up with her husband some 12 years back, and he was promptly deported. Why? Because, uh, you know, the lady in question didn't want to share custody with the husband. So in India, this happens willy nilly. In America, I want to emphasize what has happened out here. The two people in question crossed a certain line. If you remember the American visa questionnaire and the green card conditions, they very clearly state no support for designated terrorist organizations. Now, Hamas is not designated a terrorist organization in India. Designated. I think Hamas designated terrorist here as well. Remember, 10 Indians were killed on the 7th of October. And one part Indian, Matan Zalgaonkar, is still in custody, is a hostage out there. That said, in America, they've crossed a certain threshold. There is the Al Jazeera video right now of Colombia, of Ranjani Srinivasan in Colombia doing the rounds. And what it shows is that she was part of the group that was actually blockading and preventing students from entering. She crossed the line from free speech to actual obstruction of people who wanted to go about their daily work. Mahmoud Khalil is significantly more serious than that, because it turns out that there is a consistent pattern of him actually encouraging violations under the Brandenburg Standard, which is the American standard of free speech, which is specific threat against a specific person or a community. And he's done this not on one occasion, but 8 separate occasions. So he's violated the gold standard for free speech in America 8 different times. And Ranjani again violated the standard for free speech in America. You're free to say what you want. You're not free to obstruct what you want.
And therefore, you have no sympathy for her, and you believe the government has to just keep off this entire issue. Abhijeet?
Absolutely. This is, like Ambassador Dayal said before me, this is nothing to do with us. We cannot be pleading her case. We can't be pleading the case of everybody that goes abroad and decides to make a mistake. She crossed the line. She crossed the American free speech line. That's it.
Right. The images we see on our screen have been released by Mahmoud Khalil's family. They show how he is handcuffed and taken away. This by the way, is important to observe because this is what would have happened to Ranjani Srinivasan had she chosen not to self-deport for Canada, that is to leave the country before she was arrested. So I want to be very clear that this is what can happen, as Ambassador Dayal said, if you get involved in protests in another country where you don't fully even understand the import of what you're doing. Sanjay Hegde, let me actually bring you in here. I know that you might quite not agree with everything that has been said so far. So go ahead, Sanjay Hegde.
Well, you almost have set up a standard of expectation from me, but let me put it this way. There's something right in what Ambassador Dayal said. Don't get into trouble. But the definition of what constitutes trouble or what does not constitute troublemaking has changed over administrations. You must remember that, for instance, in 1968, the movement against the Vietnam War came to a head with the protests in Paris, which was an international students' movement. Students have been known to espouse causes all across the globe. Pandit Nehru, as part of our freedom struggle, supported the Republicans in the Spanish Civil War. We've all been part of the global citizen movement, as it were. Today, suddenly, we have now governments which have decided to weaponize the legal systems of visa granting. And you spoke of Mohammed Khalil. Mohammed Khalil had a residency, a permanent residency in the US. That his wife is American. His child, under the current laws, when born a month hence, will be American. He is suddenly his permanent residency is revoked suddenly, and he's arrested. That is directly as a consequence of his writings, his speeches, and whether you can do that to a permanent resident is being challenged in courts by some of the great law professors in America. As far as Ranjani Srinivasan is concerned, she was on a student visa, which is much easier to cancel, and the government of the US has done precisely what the government of India has done in the case of several OCIs. They've suddenly said that, this don't go around with this feeling that you are a citizen in all but name or all but legally. You are only long-term visa holders, and we can cancel it in the blink of an eye.
But isn't that just the fact of the matter? We may not like it, but that's true. That's true. No. These are not our own countries. When you go to another country or somebody comes to our country, you have to follow the rules of that country, whether you like them or you don't like them.
Of course, you have to follow the rules of the country, and the rules keep changing all the while. That's my point. You didn't make another argument there.
Yeah.
You can be against what happened on October the 7th. But you can equally be of the view that genocide is no answer to a terrorist attack. So if you say that Israel's actions are grossly disproportionate, contrary to international law, and Israel has been held to be in violation of the international law by the International Court of Justice, that has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Right?
Okay, yes, the Israel-Gaza debate is a very different debate. But yes, Prasad, as someone who's a green card holder yourself, there are two ways of looking at it. One is that these are educational campuses, and educational campuses are spaces, some might argue, where you make even your ideological mistakes. You're confused, you're young people, your tendency is to come out on the side of what you believe is the underdog. A lot of young people thought that the underdog in this case were the people of Gaza, notwithstanding what happened on the 7th of October. There were others who thought that it was a clear act of terror, but what Israel did was disproportionate. So there might be, and then there are others who think that these protests were just a camouflage for anti-Jewish sentiment. And maybe the truth is that there were all three elements in these protests. Let's be clear. Some sort of confused young person's starry-eyed, oversimplified ideology. We've all been there. Some anti-Semitism, some, yes, October 7th was terrible, but what followed was terrible. Now, as a father of young people, as a green card holder yourself, in the US, what is the one thing you would never do? Because it's not your country.
Thanks, Barkha, for calling me here on the show. I have 3 points to make. First is uh, Mr. Hegde talked about the whole history of visas and how the laws change. We have to understand Ellis Island, where Americans welcomed foreigners from Europe, they didn't even need visas. They could just jump into a ship, come in, just register and enter. There were no visas then, but then visas came into being. So visas, the law of immigration and visas always changes in every country around the world, no matter which country you're talking about. So that has nothing to do with political weaponization. It's just the nature of the law itself. We were never biometric while entering the US before 9/11, but after 9/11, they started taking biometric fingerprints of all of us, and we all know that. So these things constantly keep changing. So that's the one point about visa history that I wanted to make. Second, the student, F1 visa student, you're right. Youthful indiscretion cannot be blamed or taken refuge under for violating rules. You are an F1 student. You've been specifically granted permission to enter the country for the purpose of studying. You are not even allowed to work. You cannot take up employment when you're on an F1 visa. So those rules are very, very strict and clear. And if you violated any of those rules, if you've done anything else other than just that, then you're automatically, subject to deportation. So that is the rule. And I think this girl was quite smart in choosing self-deportation because she was asked the question specifically, do you have the money to go back to India or do you need assistance from the US government? She said, no, I'm okay. So I'm self-deporting. I'll go on my own. So that's the context of self-deportation. Now, what happens is once you take the assistance of the US government to go back to your country, then that's almost like a permanent ban. You will never be allowed back into the US. But this girl was quite smart. She reserved that right and kept that door open because in future, if a less right-wing government comes into the US and she applies, she stands a good chance of actually getting the visa and re-enter the United States. I personally know of people who have actually done that and they have been granted entry. So in that respect, the US is very fair. It doesn't hold grudges against you. Green card, same with me. I'm a green card holder for 27 years. I know the history of what happened on January 6th and some of the things that happened there, but I refrain myself from even commenting or participating in any public discussions on that matter because as a green card holder, I am not allowed. Now, I may dispute the philosophy of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's the way it is. The rules very clearly say that I am not allowed public discourse that is reserved for US citizens. So we cannot take any grandstanding or any different approach towards, oh, this is human rights violation, free speech violation. No, it's the law of that country. If you don't like it, leave, go back to New Delhi, stand in front of the Israeli embassy and start protesting. That's fine. So that's my take on it.
We briefly bring in Abhijeet before I actually come back to our own issue of the OCI cards, right, Abhijeet? Youthful indiscretion. I do want to explore this point a little bit about, people go to, either you're that studious middle-class Indian who gets a scholarship, you go abroad, you want to study, you want to make it big in life. But there's also the whole thing of a heady educational experience, which is being young and often being, I don't know, intuitive in just liking the romance of marching for something or against something. If it's going to reach a space where you go abroad, but you could have your visa scrapped and you could be sent, with your bags packing, will that change the nature of education? Because it's also important to note that Columbia University, many months later, has actually announced a series of suspensions of several students who took part in those protests.
Absolutely. And I just want to point out be as youthfully indiscreet as you want with your speech in your own country. When
Yeah.
you're abroad, the point of the education experience is to gain responsibility as well, living alone.
Hmm.
So there is that learning curve out there, number one. Number I used to be, well, I'm still extremely youthfully indiscreet. But as long as I was studying and teaching abroad in Australia, I was not that indiscreet. Why? Because you're in a foreign country, following their rules. There is such a thing as learning your limits and boundaries. Think of this as the supreme teaching experience. I think Miss Ranjani Srinivas has got exactly what she paid for. She's got a very good teaching experience of what not to support and what to support abroad. So, yes, making mistakes and learning from them in the classroom are part of it. Smoking weed, smoking hash, she won't have been deported for that. She crossed a line very specific. Now, I've been talking to all my friends in the State Department, and many of them don't like Trump, but they're at great pains to point out that not one deportation has actually happened because of speech. It's because it crossed a line from speech to action that has actually taken place. Now, specifically with Hamas, we can argue this till the cows come home, that this was a particularly heinous and nasty crime, and there should be no support for Hamas. If you want to support Hamas, be my guest and support Hamas. But you can't prevent, like what these students did in Colombia, you can't prevent people from going to classes. You can't go around heckle other students coming in when they're feeling attacked at that point of time. You can't go around intimidating them in their classrooms. Intimidation, basically crossing the line to action, is where the problem gets.
Were you amused that she left for Canada?
Yeah, especially to a country that was throwing in all the trucker protests, debanking them for even not taking part in the trucker protests, but merely saying, I support trucker protest. Just being the social media for the trucker protest alone was enough to get you debanked and things like that in Canada by orders from the government. The suspension of civil liberties in Canada has been extremely serious, possibly even greater than Europe in certain cases. So I've given up on irony. The hypocrisy of the left is so great. I just sit back and applaud it.
So let's talk about India. Prasad, you wanted to come in briefly. Prasad, can we unmute Prasad and Tavleen also? Okay, we'll hold on to the India story for a moment. Prasad and then Tavleen and then Ambassador Dayal and Sanjay, and then we'll come to the OCI story. Prasad, quickly.
Yeah, I wanted to make a short point. Actually, this Mahmoud Khalil, the green card holder, who's been in detention, who is in detention, and his case is being heard, actually has been given a rather surprisingly fairer treatment than I would have imagined. Because if it were me in his case, they would have thrown me back out of the country. Even as a
Why?
green card holder, I have no
Why?
rights to do what he did. But
Yeah.
he is being treated more specially by given the State Department actually owns the rights to deport any green card holder without giving any reasons. That is the law. It's an immigration and naturalization law established in the mid 90s, and they don't even have to give me any reasons. They can
So
just
you're
send
saying-
me back.
Okay.
But
okay.
because he's a Syrian born Palestinian, and he's raised this cause of the Palestinians in Columbia University, and that's the hot topic internationally these days. He has been given a much fairer hearing, and I'm actually impressed by the US government that they're actually he's being given a chance to fight his case.
That's your view, but it's again one of those other another issue that has polarized America. Tavleen, you wanted to come in? Tavleen Singh?
I wanted to make the point that these protests did not start after the bombing of Gaza. There were students out on those campuses talking complete rubbish and denying that what happened in Israel happened at all. So we can't in fact, Larry Summers, I think, had to make a statement saying, "What are you talking about?" They were already supporting whether India considers Hamas a terrorist organization or not. They committed an act of terrorism. You know, like 26/11 in what happened in Bombay was an act of terrorism. What happened in Israel was an act of terrorism. So whether we think that it was a terrorist organization or it was terrorism that these
No,
students.
no, no. My question is different. My question is, you can think, as Sanjay Hegde said, that October 7th was an act of terrorism. You can think that Hamas is a terror group, but you can still disagree with what Israel has done subsequently.
Yeah, but I wanted to say that the protests began long before the bombing of Gaza.
Right.
Yes.
But okay, Sanjay Hegde, it is true that there were viral videos of young people, including Indians, going down and taking down the posters of hostages that were put up, let's say, all across the cities, Israeli hostages. But equally, I do think that you can think Hamas is a terror group, condemn 7th October, and have disagreement with Israel's response. And I think that would be a different debate. And I think what we've done is we've clubbed everything together. And that is why it's so complicated to have these conversations. Sanjay.
Well, yes.
And for the record, I very much think that 7th October was an act of terrorism. I very much think that Hamas is a terror group, whether India has classified it as one or not. And I was on the ground reporting after 7th October, and I saw women and children in kibbutzes who had been basically assassinated by the Hamas. Now, I may have disagreements with how Israel has handled it, and that would be a different debate. But go ahead, Sanjay Hegde. I just wanted to put my own position on record.
Well, my own position is that killing babies and starving an entire population into surrender is absolutely wrong. There is no way you can support it. And as a thinking being, wherever you are, if you want to oppose it, if that country then shuts you down by throwing you out, then it speaks of the country. So I do not support genocide. And that is what is happening. And I do not want to turn a blind eye to genocide.
But does that opposition need to involve supporting the Hamas?
No, it doesn't. No, not in my mind. It is your mind.
Tavleen is saying something. Can we unmute?
Hang on.
Okay.
Can I just finish?
Yeah.
Sorry, they were supporting Hamas.
Can I just finish?
Okay, all right.
See, this is a lot of life today is binary. If you oppose the BJP, you stand for the Congress. That kind of binary. That's nonsense. On each issue, you can take a stand. And killing babies under any stand, any norm, is totally morally wrong. That's where I stand.
Okay, Tavleen, briefly, then Ambassador Dayal, and then Abhijeet. Yes.
Because since he's actually attacking what I said, I would like to respond. I also believe that genocide is a crime. You'd have to be a lunatic to support genocide. I think that what Israel has done in Gaza is awful. But I want to simply to point out that the protests began before the bombing of Gaza. And there were students supporting Hamas openly. That's the only point I was trying to make. You'd have to be insane to support genocide, okay?
Okay, Ambassador Dayal, these debates do get... Sorry, Sanjay is trying to say something. Can we hear Sanjay for a second? Yeah, Sanjay?
Just one line.
Yeah.
There would have been protests, but the question is, as far as Ranjani Srinivasan or whatever she is concerned, what was the time of her protest? I don't think it was way back in 2019 or something. What has happened? The Israeli response in Gaza has been so disproportionate that it has compelled people not to be silent.
Okay. I think this conversation itself reveals to you how polarizing this conversation is, how we get trapped in binaries, how it is perfectly possible to first say Hamas is a terror group, what they did on the 7th of October was an act of terrorism, and then get into a debate on whether Israel response was either proportionate, punishing people who do not support the Hamas for it, and so on. But Ambassador Dayal, that is the stuff perhaps of another conversation, yet it cannot be separated. Because Ranjani Srinivasan might reach Canada and say, you know what, I stand by everything I said. And Canada may have no problem with that. And then we're in this kind of, we're in some other debate. I think the debate quite simply is that if you go to, for example, live in Singapore, you do not throw chewing gum on the streets. If you go to live in Singapore, you accept that it doesn't have a free media. You make that choice because you live in Singapore. and there's something else that Singapore is giving you. And I think those are the trade-offs everybody has to decide for themselves. But should that apply to campuses where people are rebellious without even thinking of why?
Barkha, let me tell you something from my own personal experience. My twins, a girl and a boy, went to the US to study in the year 2000, 25 years ago. They got green cards. Later, they both became US citizens. Now they're both US citizens. All along, when they held Indian passports, my advice to them was never get involved in any political activity which will be taken amiss by the local authorities. Now they're US citizens, it's up to them if they want to take part in US political activities. Now, this discussion is not about whether Hamas was right or Israel was right. It is not about whether the protests were correct. It is not about whether US citizens should or should not be allowed to protest against the Israelis. This is about an Indian student visa holder taking part in these protests. Look, the dimension is completely different. A student visa holder is bound by certain conditions. And one of those conditions is clearly not to get involved in anything which is political and which is taken amiss by the local authorities. Now, let me recall that in this case of the protest on the Columbia University, which started in April and went on till June. And as Mr. Sanjay Hegde said, this was the first time that such protests were held after the 1968 protests relating to the Vietnam War. But the important thing is that the Columbia authorities, the Columbia University authorities, asked the police to come in. They invited the police to come in to disrupt what was going on in their building. You know, buildings were taken over by these protesters, and the university authorities were keen to oust them. Hundreds of people were arrested. So it was clearly something that was happening which was illegal and which the local authorities were frowning on. Therefore, for an Indian student visa holder to be involved in a protest like this was certainly dangerous. She should have realized that the consequences for her would not be good. So all I'm trying to say is that as a student visa holder, she should not have taken part in these protests. And whether the protests should have taken place, whether they were justified, is all a different matter, but we are not involved with that.
That's an important point, Abhijeet, that this is actually not about where you stand. I mean, for Sanjay, he thinks it is. I think what Ambassador Dayal is saying is that if his children were students today, he would possibly tell them, if they were student visa holders, listen, stay away from all this, hunker down, get your degree. Today, they're US citizens, so it's up to them how they want to respond. Sorry, Sanjay, you wanted to come in before Abhijeet? Sanjay?
No, it struck me that I had a reverse to what Ambassador Dayal was saying.
Yes.
As you know, most of my family is abroad.
Yeah.
And many of them are citizens abroad. But let me tell you that the same kind of chilling effect they also feel. They keep telling me, why do you speak against the government of the day? When if we were to want to come in or on a visa of any kind or on a long-term visa, it might affect us. So my point is, this weaponization of citizenship laws is something that governments all over have now resorted to. And in an age of the global citizen and the age of the internet, this is a dangerous development. Possibly when the tides of history again turn, mankind will have to address itself to this problem.
So I think that's a good sort of segue into what's the debate that's also ongoing here. And I'll come to you, Abhijeet, on that, which is that The Guardian reported, earlier this week. And can we show that Guardian clip, please? The Guardian reported that a US journalist is actually suing the Indian government, the Modi government, after losing his OCI card. The government sent him a notice saying that he was indulging in malicious propaganda against India. He says he was punished for writing about an Indian corporate and exposing what he said was corruption. I don't know what the grounds are legally to sue the Modi government. I don't think there are any, but he's doing it nevertheless. So I think Sanjay Hegde's point is that this is not only about America, it is about the citizenship debate in an increasingly globalized world. What is your take, Abhijeet?
So I'll repeat ad nauseum now. Sanjay is just plain wrong with America. You have to cross a certain threshold of action in order to get deported. And that has always been the case. Just because the last Biden government was politically inclined not to do so, didn't mean it didn't happen before. It has happened under George Bush. It has happened under Barack Obama. This is absolutely nothing new. The Biden administration was the only aberration out here. America only deports. They do not deport for speech. They deport when a threshold way beyond speech has been crossed specifically. Number one. Number two, when it comes to genocide, I just want to point out both Human Rights Watch and the International Criminal Court had to literally change the last 70 years of jurisprudence on genocide to determine what was happening was genocide. You go to the Geneva Convention, there is collateral is perfectly acceptable. You have to take minimal, you have to attempt to minimize death and destruction, but collateral is acceptable. You know what is illegal under the Geneva Convention? Taking hostages. It is illegal to take hostages and it is illegal to hide behind civilians, which is what Gaza was. It was a trap. Not one of you on this panel has been to Gaza. I have actually spent a whole month in Gaza. I've spent a whole month in Gaza and I've actually seen how Hamas go from house to house and have their setup. And this I'm talking about 2007 or 8. You know, when they'd just taken over after the big split between the West Bank and Gaza had happened. And they were already weaponizing every single apartment. You could see it. It wasn't even secret. So the person who's actually carrying out the genocide in Gaza is Hamas itself. All right, not the Israeli government by any stretch of the law, unless, you know, you decide to change the laws to suit your whatever judicial
But do you agree with Israel blocking food supplies to Gaza? Do you agree with people who do not support Hamas in Gaza being punished in this response by Israel? I mean, we're getting into something which is not the centerpiece of this conversation, but since you mentioned it, I must ask you. Yeah.
So withholding food is because we know that Hamas is the one that takes control of it and distributes it. You are not allowed to deny food to civilians. You are allowed to deprive your enemy of food. And the problem is Hamas controls everything out there. Then how do you make a distinction? So you then insist, which is what Israel did, that the UN should take responsibility for the distribution of food. The UN refused to take responsibility for the distribution of food. Why? Because they don't want to send more people in there. All right. And there's all matter of transcript and record on the record. But sorry, coming back to the main thing, OCI. In India, unfortunately, we cancel OCI for everything. Remember, the Congress Goa government was this one that cancelled the OCI of its former chief minister's ex-husband, chief minister's daughter's ex-husband. Why? Because they had a nasty little breakup and the father wanted custody and things like that. This has happened in the case of Tavleen as well. Her son got his OCI cancelled. Why? Because he criticized Modi. So in India, generally, the law is a bit of a joke. Let's not hold a third world country up to first world standards.
Are you calling us a third world country? How dare you?
We are a third world country. We have not.
No, I don't like this. But this nomenclature, I disagree with. This first world, third world.
I think, right? You know why? Because
okay, Sanjay wanted to come in, but yeah, quickly complete your point. Yeah.
But I am politically incorrect.
Do you agree with this journalist OCI being cancelled? The one the Guardian has reported on.
I have just been sent videos which I'm not allowed to share, which clearly show him in journalistic pursuits in India. Now, I just want to point out the OCI does not exclude you doing journalism. It gives you all the rights of an Indian citizen, short of voting and owning certain types of land and things like that, right? So I still don't see the breach. So as of now, I don't support his expulsion. But the people I'm talking to in government say they'll show me a lot more, which will change my mind. So,
but in general, you do not agree with the way the OCIs have been cancelled. In general,
yes, because the same flippancy with which OCI is cancelled in India is used to jail people without rhyme, reason, or proof.
Okay. Abhijeet is taking a rather, some might say, a complex view, has one set of views on what's happening with America, Trump, Israel, Gaza. But in India, in our own country, it says there's a flippancy with which OCIs are being cancelled. Sanjay Hegde, you wanted to come in, and then Prasad. Yeah.
Well, firstly, I don't think the US is the first world or the leader of free speech anymore. Trump's US is the third world. It is an emperor's republic right now, and I have no hesitation in saying that. The second part, as far as the OCI business is concerned, I just want your viewers to have some history.
Yeah.
You see, our constitution doesn't allow dual citizenship. That is partly because when the constitution was framed, we were framing it for a country that had been partitioned. We had to know who were our people, who were not our people. But the constitution specifically said that Parliament later could take a call. Parliament has never taken that call. Under Mr. Vajpayee, they took a call to sort of give people everything short of full citizenship, because that would involve a constitutional amendment. That is how it was sold, the OCI scheme. And so many people rearranged their lives based on the fact that while they could not vote in India or could not become a Supreme Court judge or things like that, they could nevertheless plan the rest of their life in India, continue, come in and go out whenever they wanted. That was how it was sold. Now, Abhijeet may or may not know it, but there are some journalists who are not Indian citizens, but who have operated here all the time. They've been editors of major papers, they run portals, and they're not particularly liked by the current government. It was in their cases that finally the view came about that, no, why don't we just get rid of them by not allowing them to operate within India? That still has not succeeded.
But that hasn't happened. I think your reference is to The Wire. I think your reference is to The Wire and to Siddharth Varadarajan, who is, as far as I know, is an American passport holder. I could be wrong. Again, I'm caveating it. I think your reference is to The Wire, right, Sanjay?
Yes, the reference is.
But the wire is functioning. The Wire has not.
It started off there. It started off there, and then to use Abhijeet's term of collateral damage, Tavleen's son became collateral damage. Many others became collateral damage, and many others are now feeling the chilling effect of this kind of regime. That you are here on sufferance. Don't think that you're citizens. Don't think that because your father is
are we saying that borders are irrelevant, that all countries should have the same values, all countries should have the same rules? Because my question to you, Prasad, is this: are you an OCI holder? You're a green card holder, I know. Do you have an OCI card, Prasad?
Barkha, no. OCI card is overseas citizenship of India, which means
I see.
You have to be a citizen, a foreign passport holder.
You have to be a
Indian
citizen elsewhere. Sorry, my mistake.
Right.
But the reason I asked you that is because how many places are you going to be careful in was going to be my question.
You're right.
So you have a green card. You have a green card in the US, so you're going to watch what you say. Yeah. You're still a citizen in India, so maybe you don't have to be that careful here.
Yes.
But I think Sanjay is saying that what if there's a foreigner, technically a foreigner whose home is India?
Yeah. So I'll get to that.
Is he not entitled to the rights that are given to others in India?
No, they're not. Because my children were both born in the US. They are by birth, they're American citizens, and they are OCI card holders. And just to give a quick 30-second perspective, Vajpayee ji did not introduce OCI. It was Narendra Modi. Vajpayee ji introduced something called as a 5-year PIO card, persons of Indian origin. It was like a multiple entry visa.
I think Ambassador Dayal is correcting us. Ambassador Dayal, can you correct us? Can we unmute Ambassador Dayal for the factual position? Yeah.
Shri Narendra Modi became Prime Minister of India in 2014.
Correct.
Yes.
I retired from the Foreign Service in 2013. And for several years before my retirement, we were issuing OCI cards. So it is not that Prime Minister Narendra Modi introduced this. They were there earlier. Of course, at that time, there were also PIO cards. What happened during Mr. Narendra Modi's time is that the two were merged. The PIO cards also became OCI card.
The OCI
But may I
cards.
just say one thing, please?
Yes.
You had asked me to come and discuss this case of Rafael Sattar,
Yes.
the journalist whose OCI card has been revoked. And he has filed a case in a court in India. And in fact, the Delhi High Court heard his plea last week. So when I was invited, I said, I'm not sure whether I should even be talking about this because it's sub judice. Of course, Mr. Sanjay Hegde would know better. He's a lawyer. But I'm the son of a lawyer. My father, my uncle were lawyers. My grandfather was a judge. And the rule which I learned at home was, if there's a matter in court, don't talk about it. It's sub judice. I don't know what is the truth.
Okay, so we won't talk about this particular case, but we can talk about OCI cards in general. And I think Abhijeet made the point about what he called flippancy. I do want to come to Tavleen, Prasad. So if you want to wrap up your point, and then we'll take last comments. I think Tavleen has a personal angst on OCI cards.
I stand corrected. What Mr. Modi did is he merged the two programs, PIO and OCI. He merged the two programs and got rid of the PIO card and basically gave an OCI to everybody. And I remember this because I had to go through this process for my own children. Both had PIO cards before, and after Narendra Modi came to power,
would you tell your kids when they come to India to watch what they say because they have OCI cards?
Absolutely. And I'll give you specific examples. Very important. I'll give you specific examples. Whenever OCI card is, again, it's very creative, but also you cannot escape the Indian bureaucracy. It was announced by the Prime Minister to make it simple for overseas citizens to come to India and be free enough. Otherwise, every 6 months you had to register with the local police station and all of that, which was all removed. But the bureaucracy in implementing the OCI program introduced this field in the application form saying, please give me your US passport or your foreign passport number that's embedded in the OCI card. So every time your US passport expires and you get a new one, you have to inform the OCI card and get a new OCI card.
Okay, but that's a different debate. But that's a different debate from the one we're having.
Correct.
You're basically
what I'm saying is if you don't do that, the immigration officer in Mumbai, in violation, will not allow you into the country. He has that discretion. So they have to be careful in what they do, what they don't do. Number one.
Okay.
I'm wrapping up. I'm wrapping up. Second thing, the going back to the US citizenship by birth and US citizenship by naturalization, I would caution Ambassador Dayal that you could have your naturalization certificate revoked if you participated in certain protests, if the government chooses to do so. That is also part of the law.
Okay. I think what we're hearing here is that basically if you are not a citizen of another country, you've got to suck up a lot more. Stay in your lane. Now I want to bring in Tavleen and then we go into last comments. Tavleen, an OCI card's cancellation is personal for you. Your son lost his, and the allegation was that he didn't fully furnish information linked to his biological father in Pakistan.
That's what I want to clarify. Atish came here when he was 2 months old. He was born in England, and because his father was Pakistani, we thought it would be better at that point you could get a citizenship if you were born there. They've changed the law. And because we wanted, I didn't know whether we were going to be, the relationship was going to continue, which is why we got him a British passport. When he turned 18, he had a choice. And at that point, I said it's easier to travel if you've got a British passport. He wanted to go to, college in America, which is why he stayed with it. But I was actually advised in the foreigners thing. I put down totally there, the name of his father, everything, making it clear that he was Pakistani. They weaponized that against him for no reason that anyone can remember. But the point that I want to make is that in India, it has been mostly used to curb free speech. In Atish's case, it was directly related to that article. And, I think that is when when you're weaponizing a visa, and he's not allowed an ordinary visa to come to India. He's not allowed anything because they say he lied. So, you talk about weaponization, I'll tell you all about it.
But Tavleen, some might say that that's what Ranjani Srinivasan will say about her own case as well.
No, I don't
say, I've been penalized for free speech. I'm just saying, I'm not saying that. I'm saying she would say that.
well, she better not say it, because she was, she was protesting in a totally different context. Atish wasn't protesting. He wrote an article in Time magazine. They're just using it against him. Why is he then not allowed just an ordinary visa to come here? Give him a visa. He doesn't want his OCI back. He wants.
Does that make you more careful about what you say? What happened to
Me?
your son? Yeah,
Of course it does. Of course it does. You asked me that question once before. I have to pull my punches.
Yeah. And that, I think, Abhijeet, nobody should have to pull their punches, at least in their own country, I would argue. In other people's countries, theek hai.
Look, that's the rule. In India, you don't pull your punches.
Yeah.
The issue in question of why Atish was punished was for the Time magazine cover, which I thought was a very balanced article, but he's not responsible for the cover, which Time magazine chose to put as divider in chief or whatever. Like I said, India tends to be very flippant with its use of laws. There is no consistency. There is no judicial consistency. There is no government consistency. There is no consistency across any part or branch of immigration law or any kind of law in this country. You go to one bench, it will say, oh, this is if you don't like what you're seeing, change the channel. The other one will say, you're an immoral brat, you need to be in jail. There's nothing you can do about this. The nature, people tend to forget. I know you get very offended by my term third world country, but the whole point of the poverty is the symptom. The cause is lack of investment or zero investment in human capital. In the West, they view technology as an enabler of human beings. Here, we don't want to invest in human beings, and we see it as a substitute for the human being. It's not going to work. So, America has applied its laws very correctly. There is very clear standards out there.
You're saying America has been more consistent than India on citizenship laws?
Very, very consistent. Very, very consistent. Britain, in fact, has not, because Britain, you remember, they stripped that ISIS lady of citizenship. She had been given citizenship and she was stripped of it. You can't do that in America. She did not fall foul of the speech laws. She fell foul of the fact that she was going around obstructing and threatening people, which has now become quite clear that she was part of the crowd that was blockading the whole of Colombia from that Al Jazeera video where she's been identified right now.
Can we play that? Can we play that video again? I think we have access to that video of Ranjani Srinivasan on campus. Sanjay Hegde, let's bring you in. I think what we're hearing is that the argument being made is that the US is more consistent. Our system is also more judge dependent. And we've seen this. I mean, you've seen this as a lawyer in court, that, it depends on kis judge ke samne kya case aata hai. That is actually what it's all about.
Of course. And as a flippant lawyer practicing in a flippant system, let me say that is the system that we have in this country, but there are hundreds and thousands of us working to make it more consistent. And I have great faith in the younger lawyers of this country, those who have come through the national law schools and all those systems, and things are changing for the better. I don't see that happening in the US, which is going the reverse direction. So that's why I would think that an emperor's republic, which the US currently is not as good a place as India is. Then to Tavleen's point about self-censorship, when these kind of laws get weaponized, what you are essentially settling for is that in your final moments, you may not have the people whom you love around you. We've had another case recently. We've had several cases like that. And that is not who we are as a country. I do hope that our polyvocal courts with polyvocal judges do at least acknowledge that we all have a shared humanity, and that technical violations or whatever the government's particular views aside, that there are times when you cannot simply stop people from meeting their own.
Okay.
And I'd just like to end that the world would be a better place if it paid more attention to Voltaire. I disagree with everything that you say, but I will defend to death your right to say it. So you may not like what Rajni says, but you have to defend her right to say it.
So, Ambassador Dayal, I guess the caveat would be that right can only be defended in the country where you hold citizenship. It gets complicated, though, if you have dual citizenship. I mean, it is complicated because it's a globalized world, but yet I don't think in a Arundhati Roy-esque way that borders are irrelevant. Sanjay, that may be a utopian concept, but the fact is that the way we stand when we stand at American immigration and get asked 100 questions, sometimes in a rude tone, is not the way we would accept that line of questioning in our own country. Jaisa hai, apna hai is a motto I feel about my country, which is why I've never taken citizenship of another country, despite many opportunities to do so. So I think it ends up asking the philosophical question, Ambassador Dayal. In a globalized world, are there certain global values that we should all agree on, or is it each country to its own?
Well, Barkha, first of all, let me say that this idea of a globalized world is only reflecting part of the story. Borders are becoming tighter than they were ever before. Countries are very, very protective about their jurisdiction and about their right to exercise their jurisdiction within their borders. Now, it is true that one has the freedom of speech. And much as I greatly admire Mr. Voltaire, the fact remains that he was not saying that he will defend someone's right to say whatever she or he wishes anywhere in the world. One has to be cognizant of the fact that if one is on foreign soil, one must respect the laws of that country. Now, the problem relating to this particular case about Ranjani Srinivasan is that she was on foreign soil and she was on a student visa, and student visas have their own conditions and restrictions, and she should have been cognizant of that. She did the wise thing by self-deporting herself to Canada, because now she can appeal against the decision to revoke her student visa and hopefully come back. My advice all along to students was stay out of local politics, don't take part in demonstrations, etc. Now, one of my fellow panelists was absolutely right. A naturalized citizen in the United States can find that if there is something wrong with the process or whatever and the application, that citizenship can be revoked. But the fact of the matter is that's not what we are talking about. We are talking about certain restrictions on people who are not US citizens, and she should have been cognizant. Now, as far as our own OCI process is concerned, let me be categorical. It's not citizenship. It's called Overseas Citizenship of India. It's not citizenship. And if you look at the conditions under which it can be denied, certainly being descended from a Pakistani or Bangladeshi citizen is one of the restrictions. It is one of the reasons why you can be refused an OCI card. Now, when I was posted in Karachi, this was in the early 80s.
But sir, cancelling it right after a critical piece of the government might send out a very different message, which is what happened in the case of
I really don't know why it was cancelled. But the fact of the matter is, if the child's father was Pakistani, the child was not even entitled to get it. And maybe the spotlight was on the child now. I don't know the case.
I think I must allow.
But I just want to say, for Pakistani citizens or Pakistani origin citizens, people who are descended from Pakistanis, even to get a visa today for India is very difficult. I was posted in Pakistan in the 1980s, and we used to issue 1,000 visas from Karachi. Now, getting a visa for a Pakistan origin person or a Pakistan citizen is next to impossible.
Okay, I was going to close, but I think I must allow Tavleen to come in on this. It is about her son. Tavleen, go ahead.
Yeah, I was asked by the FCRO, the foreign registration thing in Khan Market, to change his PIO to an OCI. They had all the information. The Pakistani element has come in later. Yes.
Okay.
And why is he not given he should be allowed an ordinary visa. His grandmother died without being able to see him because, I mean, he lived here all his life. I mean, let's be serious. What happened to him was wrong. And it has, for me as a journalist, I have to pull my punches because of what was done to him.
Okay.
So let's not, he's not an ordinary Pakistani. He was an Indian all his life.
Ambassador Dayal, I think, okay, everybody's wanting to react. Ambassador Dayal, then Sanjay Hegde, then Prasad and Abhijeet, if you want to come in. Yeah.
I fully agree that Mrs. Tavleen Singh's son should get a visa to come to India. Getting an OCI card would be very difficult. Now, when the PIO cards were changed to OCI cards, there were some restrictions. And certainly this restriction came into play that those descended from Pakistani or Bangladeshi citizens will not be entitled. Now, however, let me tell you that government has been pretty reasonable when it grants exemptions. I know of people who are Pakistani origin people who were citizens of the United States who, when I was Consul General of India, were given Indian visas, but after their case was examined by the Home Ministry and a specific decision was given. So I think in the case of the son of Ms. Tavleen Singh, the visa can be processed provided she approaches the
He's not given an ordinary visa. He is not allowed an ordinary visa because they didn't like that article.
You take it up with the Home Ministry. Take it up with the Home Ministry.
So easy. You take it up for me.
I'm a retired person. When I was there, I would have taken it. I retired 12 years ago. I have no say in the government.
I'm telling you that it was that article on the cover of Time magazine. He didn't, and Abhijeet's quite right. The person who should have objected most was Rahul Gandhi, whom he called an unteachable mediocrity. It was a very balanced article. He didn't write the headline. But Modi didn't like the headline. And, most BJP people didn't like the headline. Right? But get him a visa. Please help me. Just get him an ordinary visa.
Just, am I muted or can I be heard?
No, we can hear you, Ambassador.
Look, let me say very categorically that as regards an OCI card, if you look at the terms and conditions, he's not entitled because the father is Pakistani.
We know that.
The visa is certainly obtainable. And well, Ms. Tavleen Singh is very influential herself. She should take up the matter with the Home Ministry. And I'm sure that a reasonable decision can be arrived.
Here's the truth
about it. Like a true bureaucrat. So spoken like a true Indian bureaucrat. Take it up to the Home Ministry.
She's saying you're speaking like a true...
The Home Ministry is...
Of course she must have, Ambassador Dayal. She must have tried, obviously, as a mother. She hasn't been able to get a visa for Atish on a normal tourist visa to visit India.
I was not even aware of her case. I was not aware of the case that she referred to.
All right. Let's move on.
Let's know the generalities, and I know that visas can be obtained. Even for children. All right. Pakistan.
I have to really close. Abhijeet, Sanjay, Prasad, quickly. Prasad, I'll start with you. Closing comments. 30 seconds. Prasad?
Yeah. The first thing, I think, because I'm an Indian citizen, I'm free to speak about India. What has happened to Miss Singh's son is unfair. If you had problems with his Pakistani heritage, they should not have given him an OCI in the first place. How can you issue it and then cancel it? So I think he deserves a visitor's visa, at least for family reasons. So that's one thing. Second, it's the story of Michael Fay, the American citizen in Singapore who vandalized cars, and the Singapore government, as per their rules, ordered him to get 6 whiplashes. The president, Bill Clinton, got involved and he said, please treat my American citizen nicely and don't give him the whiplashes, waive it. The Singapore government said, we normally don't bend the law, but because we got a call directly from President Clinton, we will reduce it from 6 to 4. That's how immigration laws and behavior of foreigners are implemented. It's been a historical thing. Nothing will change. So I think we all should learn
that's
how
the
to
reality
stay in the
check.
lane.
Like you're at stay in your lane if you're in a country other than your own. Abhijeet, last thoughts? Can we unmute Abhijeet?
Yeah. Two things. First is America is still extremely liberal with speech. We need to understand that compared to even Europe, which is essentially the second coming of the Fourth Reich that you're seeing in place with elections being cancelled in Romania and God knows what not. America is a paragon of free speech right now, number one. Two, in India, I think there are cases of severe overuse of the law, as in the case of Atish. I also, on the other hand, there are two cases not similar to Atish, maybe superficially similar, which is that of Kshama Sawant. She went after my friend who spoke against her, threatened her family, physically intimidated that entire family. Archana Iyer, I think you would have seen that video that went very popular. She was my classmate in school. She spoke at the Seattle Council and she was completely intimidated by Kshama Sawant. I actually wanted Kshama Sawant brought here and prosecuted. Cancellation is fine. The second is the case of Ashok Swain, who is essentially rabble-rousing and inciting mobs. He has crossed that line with fake news several times. These are two good cases where I think the government has done good. I think the government needs to be much more rigid and have very clear lines. You know, these fluid lines don't help anybody. Because fluid lines means you never know. You're constantly encouraged to keep testing the limits of the law. It neither suits the government nor does it suit the other person.
I think that last point is an important point about consistency, that there should be a framework of consistency. That's Ashok Swain, whom Abhijeet referred to earlier, was Michael Fay, whom Prasad referred to. So yes, these are high-profile cases, Sanjay. But I think consistency, precedent. You know, the American law is also different from ours, not so judge-dependent. Once, for example, the US Supreme Court has defined something, it usually tends to be the template that is followed. Go ahead with your last thoughts, Sanjay Hegde.
No, my last thoughts are with Tavleen. And for Ambassador Dayal, please do read Atish's book, Witness to History. It tells us so much about the subcontinent and it will tell you more about the case. The point is that, as Tavleen said, she has to pull her punches. She's in her own country. Today, in a globalized world, where our relatives are all over the world, there is no country that is safe from this weaponization of the laws that govern human movement.
Okay.
I'm not saying that let everybody into India. There are terrorist threats. We can't, but we should not hit people where they are most vulnerable. Atish couldn't meet his grandmother while dying, and I know that there are several other people who have just kept quiet, simply because they know that there will be times like this. So they neither talk in favor of the government nor against the government. The government needs to realize that, because the reasoning, as somebody told me, was tomorrow the government may change, and everything that we have said out here in support of the BJP can be used by a future government against us.
So it's an interesting thought that in an interconnected world, someone will always have a relative who's a citizen of another country, etc. But that said, I think Ambassador Dayal said that maybe globalization itself is a mythical idea in the way that we interpret it. Otherwise, militaries would not go to war. You would not need, we would not even debate Israel and Palestine with the ferocity that we do if borders did not matter, if states don't matter, if nation states have become irrelevant. Ambassador Dayal, do I see your hand going up? I was going to close. Did you want to say something? Please go ahead.
I have to clarify, first of all, that I came here to discuss the cases relating to Ranjani Srinivasan, who I think should have not violated the terms of a student visa. I came here because I was asked to comment on the case relating to Rafael Satta, and I said the matter sub judice, I will not comment. I never came here thinking that I would be discussing the case of the son of Ms. Tavleen Singh's, his OCI card, his visa matter. Unless I know the facts.
Fair enough, sir. Fair enough.
What were put down in the application.
The larger framework was very much what you had been called for, Ranjani Srinivasan, but we have discussed everything from Voltaire to Israel to Gaza to Hamas to US courts to Indian courts, and that's the nature of a healthy debate. So take it in that spirit.
But the point is that there are certain rules which govern visas and OCI cards, And there are certain cases where exceptions can be made. It's not that this is a BJP or a Congress debate. We are not taking sides politically. I am not political in the least bit. Although my father-in-law was the General Secretary of the Congress Party, I have nothing to do with politics. We are talking about specific visa and OCI related issues. I think this matter which Mrs. Tavleen Singh has raised here can be resolved. She should take it up.
Let's hope.
I don't know the
hope.
details of them.
Let's leave it there. Otherwise, we're in a circular conversation. Let's all hope that Atish Taseed can visit his mother on a routine visitor's visa. I think we can all agree on that, because otherwise we're in the weeds of what the rules and regulations are of the OCI. We leave it there. Thank you, Ambassador Dayal, Prasad, Duvurri, Abhijeet, Iyer, Mitra, Tavleen, Singh, Sanjay, Hegde, and to everybody else. Thank you for watching and have a great weekend.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.